Dear friends, welcome to today's program at the Home of Harmony. Today, on behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago, we're really very delighted to welcome Charles Nolley to give a presentation. Charles Nolley has a lifelong interest in understanding the human condition, which he has explored in the study of religion, philosophy, history, and the social sciences. He is an award-winning filmmaker whose work has been translated in multiple languages and has brought him into close engagement with numerous cultures and people across the world. He has worked in various capacities to promote understanding across religious boundaries and was a founding member of the Parliament of World Religions. He has been an active member of the Bahá'í community for the past 50 years. Today, at the Home of Harmony, Charles Nolley is going to present on the topic, Facing the Challenges of the 21st Century, a Bahá'í Perspective. There will be time for question and answer at the end of the talk, so have your questions ready. And on that note, very pleased to welcome Charles Nolley on stage.
Yeah, I do. Well, good afternoon, friends. It's a delight to be here and to talk about this topic, and I hope it will be short enough that we can spend some time chatting and have some conversations together. I'm really honored to be part of this series of lectures. I think the theme is very deep in meaning of the series, to live and to love. And it's important to each of us as we develop our own lives, but it's important to the planet as a whole. I also want to express my appreciation to the Vivekananda Vedanta Society and remember the relationship that I have going back at least 35 years when your center was in Hyde Park. And I was at the very first meeting in the basement of that building when we started to conceive the idea of reviving the Parliament of Religions in 1988. And I remember well Swami Sarvishnanda, perhaps there's some in this room who knew him, who really made it his mission in life to pull together from people in the different religious communities in Chicago to make that effort happen. And he was accompanied and who stayed for a long time with Swami Vedanta, who was a stalwart in the Vedanta Society for so many years. I was sorry to hear just recently that he'd passed away last December. But his role in the Parliament was important. You know, whenever you pull together such diverse people, you have a lot of different personalities and opinions and egos and all these things. And Swami Vedanta really was an example, I would say, of servant leadership. He set an example and never tried to create harmony and was never dominant or tried to control. I also wanted to mention that I had another encounter that was connected to here and very much by surprise. I saw the fruit of your work at the grassroots. In the year 2000, I had an assignment in India to produce a documentary on science, religion, and development, and went to very many rural places where development activities were happening. And the most remote place I went to was in the state of Karnataka in the BR Hills. And those that know that this is a pretty wild place. And visited an indigenous group called the Soliga. And they lived in very harsh conditions, very great poverty. And they were still, up until, well, even to some degree when I arrived, practicing Swidden agriculture. That's the where you cut down the forest trees and you burn them, and the ash fertilizes the soil, and you go in with just a simple digging stick and plant crops in there, and that's how they lived. And it was a tough life because that area is still full of tigers and herds of elephants who would come marauding through the villages and often kill people. When they were in the fields, they had always built platforms in the trees so they could go up and escape the animals. I mean, it was one of the last places on earth that was still plagued by leprosy and polio. So, you can imagine what it was like. And it was that way until the arrival of Dr. Hanamapa Sudarshan, who had arrived there about 20 years before I did, and he's a man my age. We were both younger then. But he saw those, when he was in med school, he had been inspired by the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, and was inspired by them to go to this remote place and devote his life to that work. And so he initially built a hospital and began, treating with disease. He went on to, he realized that actually that in the evenings that the hospital, the clinic was empty, so he used the space then to start holding classes for children in the evenings, and went on later to found a school. Later he started projects that were very culturally appropriate of economic development. And for me it was very interesting because he did this in a very subtle and very sophisticated way. He, the Soliga, like any forest-dwelling people, know in detail all of the plants that are there. And so as he taught them, he also became their student. And he learned their medicinal plants, and he incorporated those into his medical practices. He also, in teaching science, incorporated their own cosmology and their worship of the sun and so on in a way that created no conflict. And I thought it was really admirable. And in fact, at least one of his students has gone on and gotten a PhD from this place, and now is back working there. And he's still doing that. Myself, as a former student of anthropology with a lot of interest in development and in particularly in indigenous people, I really was impressed. And I could talk about that the rest of the afternoon, but I better get on with the subject. In recent years, of course, I have gotten to know Swami Ishitmananda here, and have enjoyed knowing him through the Religious Advisor Program at the University of Chicago. So I guess I should start this. Oops. So today you've already heard the topic of the talk. I have to apologize because a few days ago, I was kind of making an outline, and I got an email saying, "Can you give us a text of your talk?" And I wasn't planning to write it out. So I spent all the time writing out and no time sort of putting together the outline, and so I'm going to have to read it. I've never read a talk before, and I know it's boring, and I apologize. Anyway, embedded in the title are three pretty obvious questions. First one, which may not need to discuss, is what is the Bahá'í perspective? What are the challenges of the 21st century, and how can we face those? In the spirit of this series of knowing and loving, I'll try to integrate that theme in talking about this. I do want to make one caveat that whatever I say is my own personal understanding. They're not the Bahá'í perspective. They're just my feeble attempt to grapple with some really big questions in light of my understanding of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. For those of you who may not know, the writings of Baha'u'llah are more than 100 volumes, and so it's like an ocean, and so I can share not more than a few drops, maybe. The very first Baha'i principle is the independent investigation of reality, or the independent investigation of truth. And this applies to every human person, and it's both our right and our duty to do that. So Abdu'l-Baha says that every individual member of humankind is exhorted and commanded to set aside superstitious beliefs, traditions, and blind imitation of ancestral forms in religion, and investigate reality for himself, inasmuch as the fundamental reality of all religions and nations of the world will become one through investigation of reality. And furthermore, he goes on to say, discover for yourselves the reality of things and strive to assimilate the methods by which noble-mindedness and glory are attained among the nations and people of the world. No man should follow blindly his ancestors and forefathers. Nay, each must see with his own eyes, hear with his own ears, and investigate independently in order that he may find the truth. The religion of forefathers and ancestors is based on blind imitation. Man should investigate reality. This represents actually a pretty large break with the beliefs and practices of the past. It abolishes actually the need for clergy. It demands critical examination of traditional beliefs and practices. It frees each individual to think for his or herself, which sounds very liberating, but it also can be very demanding. It's sometimes easier to follow others. And to embrace science and reason. It requires an open mind. It requires free from our own intellectual or emotional prejudices, a readiness to see and comprehend the world, as well as our own place in it. So at a deep fundamental level, to gain a true understanding of reality, I think it must always be centered around what is our reality of our humanness. What is it that makes us human? This is a unique capacity of humanity, and it exists in the realm of consciousness or of intellect. These are faculties of the mind and the heart. In the individual, this capacity is embodied in what can be variously described as the human spirit or the rational soul. Excuse me. The reality of the human spirit is characterized by twin capacities to know and to love. How important, then, it is that this entire lecture series is centered on the exploration of these two essential human capacities, since the process of growing in true knowledge and love is ultimately the purpose of our existence. When expressed in service, these qualities produce the fairest fruit of our lives. But that's only half of the story. We don't simply exist as autonomous beings. We are embedded within the matrix of human society. We're part of the human species. And the development of these knowing and loving capacities in individuals, when carried on from generation to generation, do actually drive a collective capacity of populations, which is consequently expressed in the growth and development of societies and civilizations. Viewed from this perspective, we begin to understand that the entire enterprise that we call civilization is itself a spiritual process, one in which the human mind and heart have created progressively more complex and efficient means to express their inherent moral and intellectual capacities. Now, all of this may seem a little abstract and theoretical, so let me bring it down to a little more concrete level, or at least try to. Baha'u'llah states that humanity as a whole has passed through various stages of development, and that these are analogous to the periods in the life of an individual of infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and that these stages have been marked by the expansion of the scale of social organization, the level of unity that is involved in organizing at a more complex level. This begins, of course, with the unity of the family, which is very ancient, and proceeds to unity of tribes, which is also quite ancient. It goes on to the development of city-states and eventually nation-states and empires and so on. And each stage in this process, as we know, is accompanied by an increasing level of both size and complexity, together with increasing sophistication in arts, sciences, and culture. This is a long journey of humanity that's gone on for thousands of years, and has brought humanity now to the midst of its turbulent adolescence, and we're approaching the threshold of the adulthood of humanity. This journey will continue into future generations, and eventually, the Baha'i Faith asserts, will culminate in the unification of the whole world, the final object and crowning glory of human evolution on this planet. The vision of such a transformation is actually an ancient promise. It exists in various religious traditions and cultures all around the world, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Native American cultures, African religions, Norse mythology, and heaven knows how many others. The Baha'i writings call this by different names, including the most great peace or the most great unity. And that language echoes the ancient Chinese dream of Da Tong. Lest there be any mistake, however, the Baha'i vision is neither a vague utopian dream nor the mere expression of pious hope. Rather, it is unflinching in assessing the stark realities of the present day. However bright the distant future, the present state of humanity is indeed turbulent and distressingly dark. Speaking of the present age, Baha'u'llah described two simultaneous processes. The first process is one of disintegration, involving the collapse of time-honored institutions, customs, norms, mores. The second is an integrative process that involves the restructuring of all human relationships at every level of society. It calls for the adoption of new values and behaviors and the emergence of new institutions suitable for the maintenance of a unified global society. Due to the unrelenting hostility of Muslim clergy in the Middle East, Baha'u'llah and his family were banished from their homeland and spent the remaining 40 years of his life in prison and exile. And during the midst of that suffering, as a prisoner, Baha'u'llah addressed a series of letters to the most powerful kings and religious potentates of his time. And they contained a call to unity, entreating them to put aside their warlike ways and work for peace in the world, and gave them a warning of what would happen if they did not, And he's spoken in words such as these. The winds of despair are, alas, blowing from every direction, and the strife that divides and afflicts the human race is increasing daily. Signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned inasmuch as the prevailing order appears to be lamentably defective. Such shall be its plight, that to disclose it now would not be meet and seemly. Soon will the present-day order be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. The signs of this dark disintegrative process are evident in so many events in the past 150 years, as well as in the urgent challenges in the world right now. A few of them don't need to be reminded, but the war and conflict which was between and within nations is now resulting in extermination and dislocation for millions and millions of helpless human beings. The invention and proliferation of new weapons of destruction, and I include in that, of course, the weaponization of technology, of financial systems, of all kinds of new inventions that maybe are not particularly strictly military. The destruction of the environment, need not say more about that. The persistence of wrenching poverty, which exists alongside unimaginable wealth that no king or emperor of the past could have ever dreamed of, all concentrated in the hands of the few. The crises of governance that exist throughout the world today. All these are problems that are global in scope, and to solve them we need global solutions. And all of these are fueled by the rampant persistence of materialism, racism, nationalism, sexism, and religious prejudice. And sadly, it seems that many of these are growing more virulent every day. So I came across a passage that was written on March 28th, 1941, but it seemed eerily relevant to May of 2023, so I thought I would read it to you. Shoghi Effendi wrote to the Baha'is of the world, "What we witness at the present time during this gravest crisis in the history of civilization, recalling such times which religions have perished and are born, is the adolescent stage in the slow and painful evolution of humanity. The tumult of this age of transition is characteristic of the impetuosity and irrational instincts of youth, its follies, its prodigality, its pride, its self-assurance, its rebelliousness, and its contempt of discipline. Indeed, it is a tumultuous and pretty dangerous time. However, amidst the turmoil of this age, there are lots of signs of the appearance of conditions that are favorable to the gradual construction of a global society, many of which are emerging out of the very crises that threaten our collective well-being. Many are involved with advances in science and technology, and just to mention a few, to remind us, the advances in the physical sciences, in physics and chemistry, biology and ecology have benefited medicine, agriculture, have increased our understanding of the environment. Worldwide efforts to expand education, especially for girls, has succeeded to a degree that virtually every place in the world now, women are surpassing men in educational attainment. This is an enormously remarkable, unimaginable thing even in our own lifetimes. And it's come through efforts both within countries and international efforts to stimulate education at the elementary level, especially for girls. And that started back in 40 years or so ago, and now we see the fruits of it in the matriculation through colleges and universities. The expansion of global trade in ever greater number brings all kinds of people together in collaborative and interdependent relationships, if even not necessarily always because they desire friendship, but rather profit. At least they're interacting. The interaction of diverse peoples on a scale that was undreamed of even a generation ago has happened due to the vast increase in international travel, the huge numbers of students who are seeking education abroad, and of course, business contacts. Even the massive flow of refugees, while it constitutes a major crisis in many countries in the world, ultimately enhances these interactions, although it's often grudgingly and it always comes at a great cost. Our daughter went to graduate school in Norway, and we visited there, and we saw how the Norwegians, who were a very homogeneous population, had begun taking in Syrian refugees, and it was changing their life patterns. And this is, it's sad that such has to happen, but even out of those terrible situations, there are positive effects. I looked up, and there are now nearly 5,000 satellites in orbit around our planet, connecting, and we can go on Google Earth and look at any place on the planet. I mean, this is amazing, and it shrinks it all for us, and I can go and look at Nana's hometown and find the street where she lived. This also, just in terms of our consciousness and psychologically, it brings us closer together. And then there's this seemingly worthless acres and acres around the world of sand on the beach. What a miracle that out of this simple substance, there's been a metamorphosis that's produced silicon chips and these hair-thin strands of fiber made out of sand that now circle the globe, so that any one of us can, and I'm sure many of us do. How many of you make a international phone call or FaceTime call every day or every week? Raise your hand. Everybody practically in this room, and we take it for granted. But what a miracle that is, and how much that brings us together. All this data and traveling at the speed of light, and we still have a ways to go. But the recent statistics from just a couple years ago estimate that 2/3 of the population of the world now have mobile smartphones, and I'm sure that where there are not so many, they are shared. I know certainly in many places, I've read about in India how they use, maybe the village has a cell phone and they use it to get the weather reports and so on. But this is an astonishing development that gives us hope. The internet, of course, like any powerful technology, can be used for good or not so good things, but it is giving people every place in the world access to really nearly the whole of human knowledge. And so we've made huge strides in education, but what's available to us now to educate ourselves is, I think we can't fully appreciate the magnitude of that potential effect, especially when it's combined with basic education that makes people literate so they can access that information. The emergence of increasing numbers of of organizations and agencies of international cooperation, particularly the growth of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and the organizations of civil society are indicative of progress towards greater integration. And I mention that particularly because it's something that not just takes place between big institutions and nations, but it actually it reaches to the grassroots. More importantly, there are observable changes in consciousness, and this is key. Entire populations are now examining old habits of mind and discarding language that is demeaning to others. I saw an interesting example this last week on one of the morning talk shows, The View. I didn't see the show, but one of the people there made a comment which, using a word that refers to Roma people, but probably, and I think many of us grew up using this word having no idea that it had any reference to Roma, and she didn't either, and used it, and now everyone who watched that realized, have learned something. And this is happening all over, and I think it's a very healthy development. Furthermore, the histories of oppressed peoples are being uncovered and told. The 1619 Project in this country and similar efforts are very important. The fact that there's a backlash against these narratives is itself, I think, very strong evidence of their importance and their impact. Poverty, which from time immemorial has been considered a kind of natural and unchangeable feature of society. How many times, I don't know, in my life have I heard the expression, the poor are always with us. And it's a kind of a resignation to that we can't do anything about poverty. While it's still a huge blight on human progress, at least now it's widely acknowledged that poverty is a condition that ought to be remedied, even if we're not effectively addressing it. It's been recognized as a moral issue. And in a few places, obviously not nearly enough, significant progress has been achieved. Where there have been sustained, concentrated efforts, I think most notably in China, where 800 million people have been raised out of extreme poverty. Still a long ways to go, but it's a remarkable achievement. And some other places. The emergence of the new sciences of complexity, alongside earlier breakthroughs in physics and relativity, quantum mechanics, these have completely undermined the foundations of a mechanistic, materialistic view of the universe, undermine notions like the presumed separation between mind and matter, the separation between the observed and the observer. These are now discarded ideas, but that underlined a materialistic view, which unfortunately is still in the popular imagination, but it will go because it has no scientific foundation. These revolutions in scientific thought have rendered moot the imagined conflict between true science and true religion. At the same time, humanity needs to embrace a revolution in thinking about the nature and purpose of religion itself. Abdu'l-Baha explains that like science, that religion, like science, quote, consists in the necessary relationships deriving from the realities of things. I'm going to say that again because I want you to think about it. That religion, like science, consists in the necessary relationships deriving from the realities of things. Furthermore, Abdu'l-Baha says that religion must be conducive to love and unity among mankind. This is its fundamental purpose. Everything else is secondary. He goes on to say, because if it becomes the cause of enmity and strife, if it divides us, the absence of religion is preferable. This is truly a break from traditional concepts of religion. I couldn't give this talk without mentioning the Parliament of Religions, which was resurrected in 1993 after a lapse of 100 years from the initial parliament in Chicago in 1893. And it's about to convene for the 8th time. It's met in different cities all over the world and different continents. And the worldwide success of the Parliament is emblematic of a growing interest, not only in the Parliament, but in many groups, in interfaith dialogue and, more importantly maybe, interfaith collaboration on projects of service to communities. I think we have some wonderful examples of that in Hyde Park, where the Hyde Park Interfaith Council, people from a lot of different religious groups are daily working with refugees, are working with the homeless, with the poor. And it's helping meet those needs, but it's also drawing all of those people from various congregations together. More and more people are drawn to these activities because more and more there's a sense that whatever our religion, that we're all deriving our inspiration from one source. So despite all these developments, and there are many more, I think, positive things we could talk about, there's still widespread lingering skepticism about the possibility of the unification of the planet. Much of that skepticism is rooted in unexamined assumptions about the reality of human nature, which are often coupled with kind of blind adherence to traditional ways of thinking and behaving. The cult of extreme individualism, which is so present in our own society here, but is now spread throughout the world, is intimately connected with the rampant materialism in the world and the widely held views that human beings are by nature selfish and aggressive. These attitudes generate in all areas of society all kinds of corrupting influences that are evident in business, in education, in government, in social relations, everywhere. It's massively harmful to the conduct of international relations, where leaders and commentators, how often have we heard the phrase, nations do not have friends, only interests. This is repeated like a mantra over and over again. With this view of human nature, then conflict becomes inevitable. And war, if it's not immediately present, is always just around the corner. This kind of thinking is a relic of centuries of conflict, especially between the European nations who spent centuries fighting to extend their colonial empires. While these colonial empires have long since collapsed into oblivion, their dreams often of hegemony still linger. And as long as those attitudes remain, it is no wonder that the unification of the planet seems impossible rather than inevitable. It's evident then, I think, if we think deeply, that the advances in human civilization are only possible when there is an increasing consciousness of being part of an organic whole. And we will not make progress through selfish assertions of power, but through acts of collective will. And this is one of the great challenges of our time. How do we generate collective will? In the world of today, we see lots of resurgent reactionary forces which are struggling desperately to maintain old hierarchies of dominance and privilege. They are certainly dangerous, very dangerous in the present. But ultimately, I think we should see that they represent the last gasps of a dying order. Dark stories of crisis, of course, fill our screens and the news and every day. As important as they are, outwardly, they are just the outward material symptoms of really what is an underlying spiritual problem, namely the absence of unity in the human family. More than 100 years ago, Baha'u'llah announced to the world, "So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. It can dispel the darkness of ignorance, prejudice, of hatred, war, and conflict." I want to pause and reflect for a moment on this metaphor, the light of unity. Because I think it helps us to see one of the sort of blind spots in so much of the thinking. I think people who are concerned about problems in the world often focus on trying to stamp out the darkness. And it kind of reminds me of a sign I saw one time on the outer door of a darkroom at my department at the university. And it said, "Keep the door closed. The dark leaks out." And so I think oftentimes when we think about strife and conflict and war, we think about it as like the dark leaks out. What do I mean? Darkness has no positive existence or reality. It is the absence of light. And if you look up war in the dictionary, typically you will find it says the absence of peace. So this makes the assumption that war is the natural state, and when I guess people get tired, they take a break, and then that's peace until they can gather the energy to fight some more. So that assumes that peace is an empty thing. It's absence of something, when in reality, it's just the opposite. Peace doesn't happen by accident. Peace happens by creating unity, and unity is created by structures that bind us together, the ties that bind families together, the ties of the relationships between mother and father and children, which have obligations and have love and nurturing. These are the things that create peace. And when those things break down in society, we have conflict and war. We don't think about this enough. I guess the question then is, the light of unity, I think, is a very powerful metaphor. It can illuminate the whole earth, dispel the darkness of ignorance. So if we think of that, we won't dwell on hatred. We will dwell on love, because we cannot stamp out hatred by trying to stamp it out. We stamp it out by shedding light, and then the darkness dispels. So how do we kindle this light? I'd like to circle back sort of where we began. That is the investigation of human reality. And remind us that I'd concluded earlier that and observe that the unique capacity of our as human beings exists in the realm of consciousness, of our intellect, of our faculties, of mind and heart. That capacity is nurtured and developed within our social matrix, and it contributes to a collective consciousness that holds our society together and ultimately drives the evolution of civilization. Today, that light of unity begins with awakening within ourselves a deep and abiding consciousness of the oneness of the human race. This is a spiritual truth. It has been hinted at in past ages, but today, actually, it is unambiguously acknowledged as a fact by all the human sciences. Now, it's not an entirely new creation in the sense that this oneness of mankind actually has always existed. It's just been hidden, much as a flower is, during the wintertime, is hidden within the seed. It's dormant in winter, and it's waiting for the spring to appear. Baha'u'llah announced in a wonderfully poetic tablet that we are now living in a new spiritual springtime. And it's a time when the warm rays of the sun of reality are awakening the seeds of this new consciousness in the hearts and minds of people everywhere. With this new consciousness comes a quantum leap in our capacities for knowing about the world and for loving. And with that expansion comes the capacity, I believe, to change the world. This brings me to that third question on the first slide, which when I got to this point in sort of writing this talk, I realized I needed to change it because it's kind of, I felt like there's three questions in one. So I thought it's good to ponder, and maybe we can talk about that. What can we do? What is it that we can't do? And what might happen if we do nothing? Now, I'm going to speak to those a little bit, but in reverse order. What happens if we do nothing? If we do nothing, first of all, we prolong the suffering of the world. I think we should all ask ourselves, do I want to be responsible for prolonging the suffering of the world? Secondly, we fail to fulfill our own our potential to become fully realized human beings. And finally, it could be possible that we would experience regret in the next world. So, what is it that we can't do? We can't stop all the suffering in the world. Why? Because this process of disintegration and reintegration is necessarily a painful process, just as the birth of a baby. And we can mitigate it to some degree, but these are large forces of history. This is the largest transformation to a unified human race, is as a monumental change, probably as when people who had lived for thousands, if not millions of years as simple hunters and gatherers started farming and developed agriculture and domesticated animals, which allowed them to invent writing and to have a division of labor, and the seeds of what we call civilization. History came into being. Everything before that is prehistory, because we had no writing. There was no concept of law. All the fruits of civilization began in that very seminal time a few thousand years ago. The change taking place now is at least as monumental as that, if we, I think, perceive it correctly. So what can we do in this large picture of history? And, we're small, but we can, I think, help to mitigate some of the suffering in the world. And however much or little it is, that's a worthy thing and makes us noble. We can cultivate our own person. We can attempt to acquire virtues. We can intensify our efforts to understand the fundamental realities of the world we live in. We can strive to awaken and deepen our consciousness of the oneness of humanity until it becomes bone deep. We can examine ourselves and root out pockets of prejudice that we've all inherited, and so many of which are unconscious. We can study and engage with others to expand our capacities for knowing and loving. We can engage in a process of building diversified and unified communities that will be a model for the world. We can look deeper, and I would invite you to look deeper into the glorious vision and blueprint for building a unified world that is in the writings of Baha'u'llah, and see how they can empower to become an engaged citizen of this world and a bright candle of unity and peace. I'd like to close with these words of Abdu'l-Baha. If you desire with all of your heart, friendship with every race on earth, your thought, spiritual and positive, will spread. It will become the desire of others, growing stronger and stronger until it reaches the minds of all men. Thank you very much. So, I don't know if people want to make any comments or what? Yes, please.
I mean, on this earth, we human species, we are living with animal species. So we have been inflicting enormous suffering on them, on animals. And what does Baha'i faith say about that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
About our responsibility towards the animal kingdom.
Oh.
Yeah, because we are inflicting enormous suffering through all these, through environmental damage, animal farming, and...
Sure. Well, yeah, lots of things. The Baha'i teachings say that, because we sit at the pinnacle of creation, we have the capacity to nurture or destroy the earth. We have responsibility to care for it and for all of its inhabitants, all living things. And that has many implications. One thing that I know is becoming something that people think about more and more, for example, is the raising of animals for food. And this is something that people have done, of course, for thousands of years. It was a subsistence form for when people were hunters and gatherers. But we now know that raising animals has many costs, materially to the environment and spiritually. And Abdu'l-Baha, who we look to as our exemplar, very rarely ate meat. He said that it's not forbidden in the Baha'i teachings, but he said that as humanity matures further, everywhere we will leave off the eating of meat. And but it is a gradual process, but it's happening in so many places, and we're more and more scientifically and in so many ways we're becoming to understand the importance of that.
So, yeah, here.
Yes.
So one question when I was growing up in India, they would ask, who is the founder of the Bahá'í faith?
The founder of the Bahá'í faith, his title is Baha'u'llah, which translates as variously as the glory of God.
Then where was he born?
He was born in Iran, in Tehran, in 1817.
And then you said he was banished. What did he say that they banished him?
He banished because actually there are three central figures in the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah said.
No, I said, what did he say?
What did he say? He said that this is a new age. And that he said that this is a new divine revelation. And that it's the message that's been promised in all the religions of the past. He said that, as it says on the outside of here, I was so thrilled to come here, and when I got the poster, you have on the outside of the building that truth is one. And the sages have called it by many names.
And then
this is what Baha'u'llah announced, and this was an anathema to the Shiite clergy there. It challenged and announced these principles like the independent investigation of truth. This challenges the authority of the clergy, who have tremendous power and wealth. So this is why Baha'u'llah was arrested, imprisoned, and exiled.
And then the last question is, what is it? Do you have a holy book?
We have holy books. Now, because the Baha'i faith says that religion is one, we consider the holy books, all the holy books in the world, as scripture. All of them contain truth, and all of them are worthy of study. So we hold them all. Baha'u'llah said, make no distinction between the bearers of my message. So Baha'u'llah himself wrote extensively. There's more than 100 volumes of his writings. So we have extensive scriptures. But like I said, there are, we also, in our houses of worship, we read from Quran, we read from Bible, we read from Bhagavad Gita, all of these things. Please.
Thank you so much for your talk today, and it really allows us to kind of dig a little bit further into all the different emergent properties of humanity. I'm wondering a little bit about what we can do to, like, in terms of these emergent properties, using that for the unification process, how do we combat that with subjective idealism? For one concrete example, in narratives that we hear, how do we tease that out from things like fake news? Where does subjective idealism come into the bigger picture?
I don't know this as a formal term, but subjective idealism, but when it comes to, well, I guess the simple answer is the requirement that we, without prejudice, seek out the truth. Now, I think fake news proliferates where people are clinging to unexamined traditional ideas and imagining wanting to go back to some idealized past which actually never existed. And when people are not examining honestly, then they're subjective to be misled by all kinds of things that confirm their own prejudice and their own ignorance. So I think, this principle of investigation of reality is a really important one in this regard. Now, there's another question, and that I think involves around concept of authority. We so often hear people today talking about, I'm speaking my truth. Well, if truth is one, and I'm not speaking that one truth, and I say I'm speaking my truth, what I'm really saying is, I'm speaking my opinion, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. That's really what we're saying. That's my truth. Now, I think that exists because of the breakdown and the loss of respect and recognition of ultimate authority. And I spoke of the crisis of governance that's everywhere. It's because we don't respect authority, because we don't think it's moral, we don't think, a lot of us, these are questioned all over the place. So where has authority sat? It doesn't sit in any individual. Some of you may have watched the coronation of King Charles a couple of weeks ago. What happened? This man, took off his robe wearing a simple shirt. Now, whatever we may think of that ancient ritual, this is very important, that what gave a king or an emperor their majesty and power was that people could respect that when that is gone, then there is no authority. People go whatever way they want. And this, without some concept of the heavenly will that is external to all of us, there is no ultimate authority and there can never be unity. So that's why there can never be unity in the world without a unifying force of faith. I could talk about that for a long time, but I hope that answers your question. Anyone else? Olashupo.
Yes,
My
dear
good friend.
brother. Yes, I am very glad that I came, and
I'm very glad you're here.
Thank you, thank you. And your lecture is just so well done, so well organized. We will remember it for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to, something I experienced yesterday. I went to see Reverend James Barber. I don't know if people have heard of him. This is a man who's walking, I think of him as our Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And one of the things that we talked about was the Reconstruction, that period in the South. I think I'm not sure of the date.
Yeah, a couple of decades right after the Civil War, yes.
What was interesting is that it was a union. That whole change in the structure and fiber of America came about because of the union of Africans who had just recently shed their chains and poor white folks. I didn't know that, but that was just so striking. And his point is that there are 41% of people in America are poor. And what happens, what we're going through now is that every time there's a union of the poor. There's no color to it. I mean, you can't afford your food, you can't, so when people realize that, there is always a change. America moves forward, and immediately the forces of division get at it. They know that the only way to get power to themselves is to sow hatred They will pit men against women, black against white, and that's what led to the reversal of the Reconstruction. And hopefully, like you, he's a hopeful man too. He thinks that we are in the period of a third Reconstruction. What is going on now is another, a beginning, a nascent revival of the old, because his movement is composed of poor people, of all kinds of so-called races. Thank you very much, my brother.
Yeah, I want to comment on that. Thank you very much, Olusegun. I agree with you very, very strongly. This is a passionate topic of mine, so I won't say much about it, but Abdu'l-Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Bahá'í faith, who was shared the banishment and imprisonment with his father from the age of about 9 until he was 65. Never attended a school, but was appointed by his father to be lead the faith after the passing of Baha'u'llah. And he, as I said, was a prisoner in exile all of those years, was nearly executed in the early years of the 20th century. They were imprisoned in Palestine, and the only thing that saved him was the Young Turks Revolution, which overthrew the Ottoman Empire. And when that happened in 1909, he became free. And soon after that, after living a very hard life and being in bad health, he traveled to Europe and America. He spent most of the year of 1912 in traveling across the United States. And he saw the conditions here, and he put particular emphasis on the importance of creating racial unity in the United States. And at a time so long before the Loving case back in 1912, he encouraged some of the early Baha'is, black and white, to marry. And one of the early followers of African American believers in the United States was a young lawyer whose name was Louis Gregory, and he married a British woman. They lived apart much of their life because of the segregation. They couldn't travel together, but they remained together all their lives. And Abdu'l-Baha was well received. His visit was widely covered in the press, much like Swami Vivekananda's was when he came about 20 years before that. And there were people among the early Baha'is who were prominent in different cities in Washington, D.C. And among them was a prominent socialite who had lots of contacts among the highest circles in Washington, and arranged a big formal D.C. luncheon, which members of Congress and various politicians, and I think maybe some cabinet members were there. And of course, this was segregated Washington in 1912. And they came and sat down, and Abdu'l-Baha had an empty chair next to him, and they were ready to serve the dinner, and he said, "Where's Mr. Gregory?" And of course, Mr. Gregory was outside because it was unimaginable for a black man to be in that company. And he said, "Bring me Mr. Gregory." And so Louis Gregory was brought in and sat next to Abdu'l-Baha, and then Abdu'l-Baha praised him, and then they had their dinner. But that really, I think, set an example for a lot of Baha'is. And we have to not just talk about these things, we have to live them. And it's demanding. I know we had when we were in graduate school at the University of Chicago, I won't say how many years ago, but there was a young African-American Baha'i who was a friend, who was also a student at the university, and he used to come over to our house a lot. And he had grown up in a Baha'i family in South Carolina, and he told stories of how, in his childhood and youth, that the family would make them, all the children, lay on the floor because the Ku Klux Klan was shooting up their house. And, I've heard from people who were involved, for example, in South Africa during apartheid. Blacks and whites were not allowed to mix. But this is a command of Baha'u'llah. We have to do it. So they continued to have interracial meetings in the only place they could, which was on the public transportation. And they would ride and ride just so they could be together. So Shoghi Effendi called this the most fundamental and challenging issue facing the American nation. And if we don't deal with it, Abdu'l-Baha said that blood would run in the streets. And I think this is still the most vital and challenging issue, despite all the others that we face. So I'm sorry to go on. I'm passionate about this question. Please. Oh.
I just wanted to spread some information that I know about. When you spoke about the word of peace being the absence of war, when I'm attending your devotionals every first Friday, I always leave because I attend on Zoom a Shabbat service in a synagogue that I've been part of for quite a while. And in the Jewish faith, it's a mitzvah that you have to pray for peace. So they do it
They do all the time.
They
yes.
do it, and they sing a song of peace at the service. They have to do that at the Shabbat service. Well, the rabbi was speaking about it, and she said, when we say shalom, we do not mean the absence of war. Shalom is a term that's more of a sense of integrity and a whole, integrity amongst the whole, and then that is true peace. So I thought I'd add that to the conversation because it's very important. I think that word peace is, it does not have anything to do with war necessarily.
Thank you, Sister Sue. It brings me such joy to have you here. Sister Sue really does so much. She's involved in every community, I think, in Chicago, and is a radiant soul, and I'm so happy to see your face. Anyone else? Thank you very much. The 1893 Parliament is something that is, I think, of all the groups, the Vivekananda, the Vedanta Society, the Vedantists and the Baha'is treasure it most because, of course, for Swami Vivekananda was really the star of that Parliament. For Baha'is, it was the first time that the Baha'i faith, that the teachings of Baha'u'llah were mentioned on in the Western Hemisphere. So we share this very special affection for the Parliament.
I met Mr. Charles in the University of Chicago, and I was selected as a religious advisor from the Hindu. There, first time I met, and so I saw him there. Then from then onwards, at different months we used to meet. Then the pandemic came, and there was no connection, mostly online. And once again, now we have got this opportunity to come and meet. Friends, we have developed this called home of harmony. This is a home, fit, comfortable. So you are not visiting somebody's home, it is your own home. And outside, as he already mentioned, and it is written over here, all paths are leading to the same goal. Truth is one, but people call it by different names. As we are wondering, what is this? All religion going towards the same goal. Sometimes some people will be asking, do you mean that everybody should be Christians? Everybody should be Buddhist? Or everybody should be Muslims? No. You can follow your own path. You can follow your own faith, own belief. But at the same time, only you have to think the other one is also correct. Now, sometimes I give the example. Suppose from Chicago, we like to go to Washington, D.C. I can go by train, I can go by car, I can go by taking a flight, my choice. And if somebody going by flight, he told, hey, my grandfather went by flight, my father also, me also, you should also come. Otherwise, I'm going to fight with you. That is problem. That is narrowness. Feel free, feel happy if you like to travel by that way. Allow others also in their own choice. I like to take my time. I like to stop over here and there. I like to enjoy when I am driving. So why you should not allow me? That is the only thing. And where we actually go, what is God? What is religion? What is heaven? They talk about heaven. What is that heaven? It's a place of happiness, right? If the heaven is a place of suffering, nobody will like to go. We are already suffering over here. We don't like to go. The heaven is the place of joy, happiness. And how one can become happy when there is hatred in mind? We cannot. But that is the reason we have to understand God is nothing but L-O-V-E and unselfishness. God is love and unselfishness. Now develop these two qualities, which is already within us, in whatever fashion you like. That's why we have started this, and every Saturday we invite different faith leaders to come and give their views. You are most welcome. Please come. Your presence, it is a support. And knowing is loving. If you don't know us, how can you love us? So that is the open invitation. Please come. And as he was mentioning about the Parliament of Religion, you'll be very happy. I am a trustee of the Parliament of Religion. It's a short period. This time, Parliament of Religion will be in Chicago. 1993 it started, and every year it traveled all over the world. Now this time again it has come back to Chicago, and this October 14 to 18, there will be the Parliament of Religion. August 14 to 18. If you are interested, please come and visit. It will be really wonderful. Thank you very much, and I invite you to take a cup of tea, and then again we'll discuss with you. Yeah.
I think, forgive me if I said this, but I think I forgot to say, at the beginning I talked about Dr. Sudarshan and the Soliga and the BR Hills. I think I forgot the most important part of that, is that Dr. Sudarshan told me, to my amazement, that a major part of his support over those years had come from the Vivekananda Vedanta Society in Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you.